My name is Camelia, and I'm 44 years old, and I never thought the son I raised with love would betray me this way. From the outside, my life probably looks quiet, maybe even unremarkable. A widow living in the same old house she shared with her late husband, raising her only son, working steady hours at the local library. Nothing flashy, nothing dramatic. But beneath that steady surface, there are cracks. Ones that started forming the day my husband passed and widened as I tried to hold everything together for our boy, Damien. The Duarte house wasn't just a building. It was where my husband, Marcus, and I built a life. We planted the oak tree in the backyard when Damien was just a toddler, his little hands patting down the soil with us. We painted the walls of his room bright blue when he insisted the sky should follow him indoors. Every brick, every floorboard carried a memory. When Marcus died suddenly 10 years ago, I thought I'd lose the house too. Bills piled up, debt collectors called, and I worked myself raw just to keep the lights on. But I did it. I held on. I held on for Damien. Back then, I believed love and sacrifice were enough to shape a boy into a good man. I wanted him to know that no matter what happened, he'd always have a home to return to. And for a while, I thought it was working. He was bright, funny, and full of charm. People in town adored him, teachers said he had promise, and I thought Marcus would have been proud. But something shifted after Damien turned 21. He grew restless, entitled. The boy who once thanked me for every small kindness began to roll his eyes when I asked him to help with chores. He spoke of bigger things he was destined for, though he never followed through on school or work. He started to treat the house not as a home but as a weight tying him down. At first, I told myself it was just youth. He'd figure himself out. Didn't we all at that age? But deep down I noticed the distance creeping in. It showed in the late nights, the whispered phone calls, the quick shuffle of papers when I walked into the room. He brushed off my questions with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just friends," he'd say. "Nothing important. But a mother always knows when something is wrong." I began to feel like a guest in my own home, tiptoeing around his moods, wondering what secrets hid in his laptop or the envelopes he slipped into his backpack. I told myself not to pry, that he'd tell me when he was ready. I wanted to trust him. I wanted to believe the best of him, because he was my son, my only son. And then one evening, I overheard him in the kitchen. His voice was low, hushed, but sharp with urgency. "Yeah, it's the house. Don't worry. I'll handle the paperwork. She won't even know until it's done." My heart lurched. I froze in the hallway, straining to hear, praying I'd misunderstood. But the words were clear. He was talking about my house. Our house. When he noticed me later that night, he was all charm again, kissing my cheek, asking if I needed help carrying groceries. But the warmth in his eyes had been replaced with calculation. I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows of the oak tree outside dancing across the walls. My mind spun through every possibility, every explanation. Maybe I had misheard. Maybe it was some silly scheme with his friends. Maybe he'd never actually do it. But a voice inside me whispered the truth. I had spent so many years fighting to keep this house safe. And now the threat wasn't from banks or bills or strangers. It was from my own flesh and blood. The next morning, I tried to shake it off, tried to believe that if I looked into Damien's face, I'd see the little boy who once ran barefoot through the backyard, laughing as Marcus chased him with the garden hose. But when he came downstairs, phone in hand, smirk tugging at his lips, I didn't see my boy. I saw someone else, someone I didn't recognize. And that terrified me more than anything. Still, I hesitated. I told myself I needed proof before I confronted him, that I couldn't accuse my son of something so awful without being absolutely certain. So I watched. I waited, I listened. I noticed how he grew defensive whenever I asked simple questions. How he left envelopes carelessly on the counter, only to snatch them up the moment I walked into the room. How he avoided eye contact when I mentioned the house or the future. Each day the unease grew heavier, pressing against my chest like a stone I couldn't shift. Until the night I came into the kitchen to grab a glass of water and saw it. An envelope. Thick, white, official-looking, left sitting on the counter as though begging me to notice. My hands trembled as I reached for it, my pulse thudding in my ears. For a moment, I almost set it back down, afraid of what I might find inside, afraid to confirm what my heart already knew. But curiosity and fear won. I slid the papers out slowly, my breath catching in my throat. What I discovered next shook me to my core. The first red flag came in the form of whispered phone calls. I stood in the kitchen that night with the envelope in my trembling hands, afraid of what I might find but unable to stop myself. The papers slid out easily, smooth sheets covered in fine print, the kind of legal language I had only seen when Marcus and I signed the mortgage all those years ago. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. Real estate contracts, valuations, a broker's card paperclipped to the top. My eyes darted over the lines until one phrase jumped out at me and stole the air from my lungs. Offer to purchase subject property. Subject property. My house. There was Damien's name, scribbled clumsily on one of the forms, though I noticed instantly it wasn't his alone. A faint trace of my name appeared beneath his in a mismatched signature. My name? Forged. The room spun. My knees buckled, and I had to grip the counter to stay upright. My son, my only son, was trying to sell the very house I had sacrificed everything to keep. I shoved the papers back into the envelope, shoving it deep into a drawer before Damien could come back and see me. My pulse hammered as I sank into a chair, staring at the wall. Betrayal is too small a word for what I felt in that moment. The next morning, I watched Damien carefully over breakfast. He moved casually, humming to himself as he buttered toast, his phone buzzing every few minutes. Each time, he'd glance at the screen and smirk, then step away from the table to take the call. That was when the red flag stopped being subtle. I could hear him in the hallway, voice low but hurried. Yes, I'll have it ready. No, she doesn't suspect a thing. When I walked toward him, the conversation cut short. He slipped the phone into his pocket, plastered on that boyish grin of his, and asked if I needed anything from the store. The performance was flawless. If I hadn't seen the documents the night before, I might have believed him. But now? Every smile looked like a mask. Every word felt rehearsed. I spent the rest of that day torn between fury and heartbreak. A part of me wanted to confront him right then, to slam the papers on the table and demand answers. But another part of me, the quieter, more cautious part, urged me to wait. To learn more. To gather proof before I accused my son of betraying me. So I waited. And I watched. Over the next week, the signs multiplied. Envelopes came in the mail addressed not to me but to Damien, marked with the names of real estate companies. He grew protective of his laptop, slamming it shut if I walked into the room. He took long phone calls outside in the driveway, pacing like a man with a secret. When I asked him simple questions, "How was your day?" or "What are you working on?" his answers grew sharper, more defensive. "Why do you care? It's my business." That word my stung. Hadn't everything I built been for him? Hadn't I worked late nights, skipped meals, scraped every penny to keep the house so he'd always have a place to belong? And now, he wanted to take it, sell it, erase everything Marcus and I had built together. One evening, I heard him laughing in his room, his voice muffled but clear enough to carry through the thin walls. "Yeah, she's old-fashioned. She won't put up a fight. Trust me, it'll go through easy. Old-fashioned, won't put up a fight." My blood boiled, but I bit down on my tongue, forcing myself to stay quiet. Not yet. Not until I had all the pieces in place. Then came the night that removed all doubt. Damien left another envelope on the counter, careless as always, as though he believed me too naive to look. This one was thinner but heavier somehow, as though the weight of its contents pressed down on the paper itself. My hands shook as I opened it, my breath quickening. Inside were more documents this time, correspondence with a buyer. A young couple, it seemed, eager to make an offer. Damien had written back pretending to act on my behalf, promising swift progress, even suggesting they could meet to walk through the house. And there it was again, my signature, forged. The scrawl was sloppy, but close enough that an outsider might not question it. My vision blurred as hot tears filled my eyes. I clutched the paper so tightly it crumpled in my fists. My son. My flesh and blood. The boy I had raised, loved, and protected was preparing to strip me of everything. I sank into the kitchen chair, staring at the papers spread across the table. For so long I had been blind to the truth, making excuses for his behavior, convincing myself he was just young, just confused, just finding his way. But this wasn't confusion. This wasn't immaturity, this was betrayal, and it was deliberate. Damien wasn't planning to sell the house someday. He was planning to sell it now. He wasn't just thinking about betraying me, he was already halfway through the process. He wasn't just planning it, he was already halfway through the process. The papers inside nearly stopped my heart. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of contracts, each page a dagger cutting deeper into me. My name scrawled across the lines in Damien's crooked imitation felt like a betrayal so sharp I could hardly breathe. The signatures weren't mine, but they screamed louder than words. He was willing to erase me from the very home I'd sacrificed everything to protect. The ink looked fresh, almost smug, as if the pen itself had been proud to participate in the deception. My hand hovered above the pages, trembling, wanting to rip them apart but unable to. Destroying them wouldn't erase the truth that my own son had become a stranger. I thought back to the night Marcus and I signed the mortgage. We had been so young then, nervous and hopeful. Marcus had squeezed my hand under the table, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. "This house is our start," he whispered. "No matter what happens, Camelia, this place will be ours." He had kept that promise until the day he died. And I had kept it since. Clawing my way through years of exhaustion and debt. Every overtime shift, every skipped vacation, every meal of rice and beans instead of meat, all of it had gone into preserving this roof over our heads. And now, Damien, our boy, the child Marcus had cradled in his arms and rocked to sleep in this very house, was preparing to hand it over to strangers for cash. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to steady my breathing. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure, as if all those years, all those sacrifices, all that love meant nothing. When I finally lowered my hands, the papers still sat there like an accusation. The letters from the buyers were polite, even eager. They called me Mrs. Duarte, thanking me for considering their offer, praising the neighborhood, gushing about the yard. They thought they were speaking to me. But it was Damien, replying in my place, promising things he had no right to promise. One line made my stomach drop. "We appreciate your urgency. We'll arrange a walkthrough next week." Urgency. Damien had made it sound like I was desperate to sell. I could almost hear his voice in my head, mocking me. "She won't put up a fight. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's old-fashioned. She won't stop me." My eyes burned, but the tears wouldn't fall. Not yet. I wasn't ready to collapse. Not while the threat was so real, so close. I shoved the documents back into the envelope and tucked it beneath a pile of old newspapers. My chest felt hollow as I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. The oak tree outside swayed gently, its branches casting shifting shadows through the window. That tree had grown with us, with Marcus, with Damien. And now my own son wanted to chop the roots of our history for quick profit. Later that night, I sat in Damien's doorway, watching him from the hall as he tapped away on his laptop. His face was lit by the screen's glow, sharp and focused. There was no guilt, no hesitation, only determination. I searched for the boy I once knew, the boy who used to curl up beside me on the couch, who begged for bedtime stories, who promised he'd take care of me when I grew old. But all I saw was a young man with secrets, his eyes gleaming with something I didn't recognize. It struck me then, the danger wasn't abstract anymore. It wasn't in overdue bills or distant banks. The danger lived under my roof, ate at my table, carried my last name. And I couldn't ignore it any longer. The weight of realization pressed down on me, heavy as stone. My son was preparing to betray me, not in some distant future, but here and now. He wasn't just toying with the idea, he was already halfway down the road, dragging my name and my home with him. I thought of Marcus again. Of his laugh, his strength, the way he used to tell Damien, "This house is more than walls, kiddo. It's our anchor. You protect it, always." I had lived by those words, and now I would have to protect the house not from strangers, but from my own son. I closed Damien's door quietly and walked back to my room, each step heavier than the last. My hands shook as I locked my door, something I had never done in my own house before. But tonight, I needed the barrier. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, one truth echoed in my mind over and over like a drumbeat. He wasn't just planning it, he was already halfway through the process. I had sacrificed everything to keep this house. The walls around me weren't just wood and plaster. They were sweat, tears, and years of sacrifice woven together like threads in a tapestry. When Marcus died, the house nearly went with him. I remember sitting in the bank office, my hands shaking as the man in a gray suit explained the situation. The mortgage still had years left, the payments were steep, and without Marcus's income, I didn't stand a chance. But I wasn't ready to give up. Not on this house, not on the life we had built here, not on Damien. I walked out of that office and straight into a second job, then a third. By day, I worked the library desk, shelving books and helping children find their first stories. By night, I cleaned offices, pushing a mop under fluorescent lights until my back ached. Weekends, I stocked shelves at the grocery store, my hands raw from unpacking boxes. There were nights I came home so tired I could barely lift my head. I'd collapse onto the couch still in my uniform, too weary to change, listening to the creaks of the old house around me. But I never regretted it. Every paycheck went to the same place, keeping this roof over our heads. I remember one winter in particular. Damien was 11. The heating system broke, and I didn't have the money for repairs. We bundled in blankets, shivering as our breath misted in the air. Damien had looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. "Mom, are we gonna lose the house?" I had pulled him close, kissing the top of his head, and lied through my teeth. "No, baby, I won't let that happen." And I didn't. I called in every favor, skipped meals, pawned my wedding ring just long enough to pay the bill. When the heat finally roared back to life, Damien had laughed and danced around the room, and I thought maybe, just maybe, all the sacrifice was worth it. This house wasn't just shelter. It was Marcus's memory, Damien's childhood, my promise. Every corner held a story. The oak tree in the backyard, planted with Marcus's strong hands, had grown tall enough to cast shade across the porch. The scratch in the hallway floor was from when Damien rode his toy car too fast and crashed into the wall. The faded blue paint in his room still bore the marks of his drawings, little clouds and stars etched in crayon when he thought no one was looking. I kept all of it intact, no matter how hard it was. And what did Damien see? Not a legacy, not a promise kept, not the blood and bone of his father's and my sacrifices. He saw dollar signs. When I found those papers with my forged signature, it felt like every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every calloused hand was being erased. He wasn't just selling wood and brick, he was selling my years of survival. He was selling Marcus's dream. The thought made my stomach churn. I sat in the living room that night, staring at the photos on the mantel. Marcus smiled back at me from behind the glass, his arm around Damien, who was grinning with a missing tooth. They looked so happy, so certain, so full of promise. I pressed a hand against the frame, my chest tight. "I kept it, Marcus," I whispered. "I kept it all these years. But now our boy is trying to take it from me." The house creaked in the silence, as if listening. I thought about the countless times Damien had run through these halls, carefree and innocent. I thought about the nights I stayed awake, worried about bills, while he slept soundly under the roof I had fought to keep. And I thought about the man he had grown into, a stranger in my son's body, willing to trade all of it away without a second thought. The betrayal wasn't just his actions, it was his blindness. He couldn't see the value of what had been given to him. He couldn't see the love that had built these walls. To him, the house was wasted potential. To me, it was everything. I sat back, letting the bitterness settle into resolve. If Damien thought he could sell this house without consequence, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Because I hadn't clawed my way through a decade of sacrifice just to watch my son hand it all to strangers. No, I wasn't losing this house. Not to banks, not to bills, and certainly not to my own son. And yet, my own son was trying to rip it from under me. I confronted him the next morning, my hands trembling. The sun had barely risen, but I'd been awake for hours, pacing the kitchen with the envelope in my hand. Every time I glanced at it, the forged signature burned into me like a brand. I knew I couldn't keep pretending I didn't know. If I waited any longer, Damien might go through with it, and by then, it could be too late. When he came downstairs, yawning and stretching, I almost faltered. He looked so young in that moment, messy hair falling across his forehead, his face still soft with sleep. For a second, I saw the little boy who used to drag his blanket to my bed during thunderstorms. But then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, smirked, and shoved it into his pocket without noticing me. And just like that, the image of the innocent boy dissolved, replaced by the man who was plotting to sell the ground beneath my feet. "Damien," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. He blinked, surprised to see me standing in the doorway. "Morning, Mom. You're up early." I didn't sleep. I placed the envelope on the table between us. "Care to explain this?" His expression froze for a fraction of a second, but then the charm slid back into place. He gave a small laugh, scratching the back of his neck. "Oh, that? Just some business ideas I've been looking into. Don't worry about it." "Don't worry?" My voice cracked. "This is my name, Damien. My forged signature. You're trying to sell this house behind my back." The smile vanished. His jaw tightened, and something cold flickered in his eyes. "So you went through my things." I clenched my fists. "Don't twist this back on me. You're the one betraying me. You're the one lying." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Finally, he leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. "You don't get it, Mom. This house, it's wasted on you." The words sliced through me. "Wasted?" "Yeah." His voice hardened. "You cling to it like it's sacred or something, but it's just a house. It's falling apart, it's outdated, and it's keeping us stuck. We could sell it, split the money, and start fresh. You could move somewhere smaller, more manageable. I could finally have a real chance at building something." I stared at him, my chest heaving. "You think this house is wasted because it doesn't fit your idea of success? This house is your childhood. It's where your father's memory lives. It's where I broke myself to keep you safe." He rolled his eyes. "Dad's gone, Mom. Hanging on to this place doesn't bring him back. It just keeps you living in the past." The casual cruelty of it left me speechless for a moment. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to steady myself. "You think I kept this house for me? I did it for you. I wanted you to have stability, a place to call home no matter what." "Yeah, well, maybe I don't want stability," he snapped. "Maybe I want freedom. Maybe I'm tired of being tied down by your obsession with this old place." The room tilted around me, his words battering me like waves. My son, my only son, was standing there telling me the life I built, the sacrifices I made, were nothing more than chains to him. "You could have talked to me," I whispered. "You could have asked. Instead, you tried to steal it out from under me." Damien shrugged, his voice cold. "Because I knew you'd say no. You're selfish like that. You hold on to things because you're too afraid to move on." The accusation stunned me. Selfish. Me, who had given up everything to keep him clothed, fed, and sheltered. Me, who had pawned my wedding ring, skipped meals, worked myself to the bone to keep this house standing. Selfish. I stared at him, my throat tightening. "I thought I raised you better than this." His eyes flickered, but the hardness returned quickly. "Maybe you raised me to see the truth. And the truth is, this house is nothing but a cage." Something inside me cracked, then not just pain, but clarity. The boy I had once cradled, once believed in, was gone. In his place stood a man who saw me not as his mother, but as an obstacle. I straightened slowly, my voice low but steady. Then you're right about one thing. This house is a cage. But it's not caging you, it's protecting me. And I won't let you tear it apart. His eyes widened slightly, caught off guard by my tone. For the first time, I wasn't pleading. I wasn't begging for understanding. I was standing in my own strength. And in that moment, I realized the truth. That was the moment I realized Damien didn't see me as family, he saw me as an obstacle. The betrayal cut deeper than any insult ever could. After our confrontation, Damien stormed out of the kitchen, his footsteps pounding up the stairs. A few minutes later, his door slammed so hard the walls rattled. I stood frozen, my hands braced against the counter, staring at the empty space he'd left behind. The silence that followed was suffocating. I had faced plenty of hardships in my life, debt collectors, grief, exhaustion, but nothing had ever hollowed me out the way Damien's words had. Selfish. That single word echoed in my head like a cruel refrain. How could he believe that? After everything I'd done, after everything I'd sacrificed, how could he see me as the one standing in the way of his future? For hours, I moved through the house like a ghost. I folded laundry with trembling hands, scrubbed dishes that weren't dirty, anything to keep myself from crumbling. But every time I passed the mantel with Marcus's photo smiling back at me, the ache grew heavier. By evening, the ache had hardened into resolve. Damien wasn't just reckless, he was dangerous. If he was willing to forge my name, if he was willing to bring strangers into this house without my knowledge, then I couldn't afford to hope he would come to his senses. I had to act. The next morning, I walked into the office of Mr. Harding, a lawyer I'd known since Marcus's passing. His hair had gone grayer over the years, his office lined with dusty books and the faint smell of coffee. He looked up from his desk, concern etched into his face as I explained everything. When I placed the forged papers in front of him, his eyes narrowed. "This is serious, Camelia. Forgery is a crime." My throat tightened. "He's my son. I don't want him in jail. I want to protect what's mine." "Mr." Harding leaned back, steepling his fingers. "You're the sole name on the deed. This house is yours. No matter what Damien told those buyers, he has no legal right to sell it." Relief washed over me, but only slightly. "Then he can't take it?" "Not legally. No," he said. "But if he keeps pushing, you need to be ready. You can press charges for forgery if necessary. At the very least, we can file paperwork to ensure no transactions move forward without your explicit consent." I nodded slowly, my heart pounding. It felt strange, sitting there in a lawyer's office, preparing to defend myself against my own child. But I knew I had no choice. Mr. Harding's voice softened. "Camelia, you've fought too hard for this house to lose it now. Don't let guilt cloud your judgment. Sometimes, protecting yourself means drawing a line, even with family." I swallowed hard, his words striking deep. For so long, I had believed enduring Damien's arrogance was the cost of keeping him close. But now I saw the truth. Silence and patience had only fed his entitlement. When I left the office, the papers tucked securely in my bag, I felt steadier than I had in weeks. The sky was overcast, gray clouds pressing low, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like they were crushing me. I felt like I was finally standing upright again. That night, Damien came home late, his jacket smelling faintly of cigarette smoke. He barely looked at me as he grabbed food from the fridge. I watched him silently, my lawyer's words echoing in my mind. "You've fought too hard for this house to lose it now." Damien thought he was untouchable. He thought I was too weak, too sentimental, too afraid to stop him. But he didn't know that I had already taken the first steps to secure everything. He didn't know that the law was on my side. As I sat in the quiet kitchen, the documents safe in my bag, a new thought began to take shape. Maybe this betrayal wasn't just about the house. Maybe it was about Damien himself. Maybe he wasn't the boy I had raised anymore. Maybe he had chosen a different path, one I couldn't save him from. The thought hurt more than I could put into words, but it also steeled me. If he wanted a war, then a war he would have. I wasn't going to let him rob me of the home I had built, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. Not now, not ever. If he wanted a war, I was ready. Damien thought I was too weak to fight back. After my meeting with Mr. Harding, I felt calmer, though the ache in my chest hadn't gone away. My son, the boy I'd once sung to sleep, was now the man plotting behind my back. But I had something he didn't: certainty. The deed bore my name, and the law stood with me. Damien, of course, didn't know that. In the days that followed, he carried himself with an air of smug confidence. He strutted around the house like a landlord, making notes in his phone as though assessing the property's value. He stopped asking if something could be changed and started saying when it would. I'd find him standing in the living room, staring at the walls with narrowed eyes. "This place needs modernizing," he muttered once, tapping on his screen. "Buyers want open-concept kitchens these days." Another time, he walked through the backyard with a stranger, pointing out the oak tree Marcus and I had planted decades ago. "This could come down, opens up the yard for a pool." I watched from the window, my stomach twisting. That tree wasn't just a tree, it was Marcus's hands in the soil. Damien's laughter as a child, my promise to keep us rooted. But to Damien, it was an inconvenience to be erased. When I confronted him about bringing someone over without asking, he brushed me off with a shrug. "Relax, Mom. Just a friend. Don't get so worked up." But I wasn't worked up, I was watchful. Each arrogant move he made became another piece of evidence. I took photos of the documents he left lying around. I noted dates and times of the calls he tried to take in secret. I even recorded one of his conversations when he slipped and mentioned closing soon. The more I gathered, the steadier I felt. For years, I had let Damien's dismissiveness silence me. But now, every smirk, every shrug, every insult only fueled me. Still, it hurt. At night, I'd lie awake, listening to his footsteps upstairs. Sometimes he laughed into the phone, careless and free, as though he hadn't shattered my trust. I wondered if he thought about me at all or if he only thought of himself. The strangest part was how ordinary he made it seem. He'd come down for breakfast, pour himself coffee, and ask casually, "Do you need anything from the store?" As though he wasn't trying to sell the house out from under me, but his mask slipped sometimes. One evening, I caught him in the study rifling through drawers. My drawers. He froze when he saw me, his hand still clutching a folder. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice firm. He forced a smile, too quick. "Just looking for old utility bills. Buyers like to know that stuff." The casual way he said it made bile rise in my throat. Buyers, as if it were already decided. I wanted to scream, to throw him out then and there. But instead, I breathed slowly and said, "You should have asked." He rolled his eyes. "You're so dramatic, Mom. It's not a big deal." But it was. Every moment was a big deal. Every moment reminded me that my son no longer saw me as his mother. To him, I was just an obstacle in the way of a payday. I returned to Mr. Harding with my growing collection of evidence. He flipped through the photos, the recordings, the forged documents. "This is more than enough to protect yourself," he assured me. "If Damien tries anything further, the law will back you up. You're covered." I nodded, but my chest still ached. I don't just want to be covered, I want him to understand what he's done. Mr. Harding sighed, adjusting his glasses. "Sometimes, Camelia, understanding comes too late. Focus on protecting what's yours. The rest, you can't control." I walked home with his words heavy in my mind. Maybe I couldn't make Damien understand. Maybe he would never see the years of sacrifice, the nights I went hungry so he wouldn't, the way I kept this house alive brick by brick. But I could make sure he didn't take it from me. 1 week later, the moment I'd been waiting for arrived. Damien came home with a man and a woman in suits, their eyes bright with interest as they stepped into the entryway. "This is the property I was telling you about," Damien said smoothly, gesturing grandly like a tour guide. "Original structure, great bones, tons of potential." The couple smiled politely, shaking his hand. They looked around with eager eyes, already picturing themselves here. And something inside me snapped. I stepped into the room, my voice calm but cutting through the air like a blade. "Funny, Damien, you forgot to mention that this house isn't yours to sell." The buyers froze, startled. Damien's smile faltered. Mom, I held up the deed, the official seal glinting under the light. I'm Camelia Duarte, the sole owner of this home, and you are trespassing on my hospitality. The couple exchanged awkward glances. The woman cleared her throat. We didn't realize. I met their eyes steadily. You realize now. This home is not for sale. Not by him, not by anyone. They nodded quickly, mumbling apologies as they backed out the door. The man gave Damien a sharp look before following his wife to the car. Within seconds, the sound of their tires screeched down the street. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Damien stood frozen, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I tucked the deed back into my bag and looked him straight in the eyes. The day he brought a buyer to the house was the day I made my move. They walked through the front door like they already owned the place. The couple's shoes clicked across the hardwood, their eyes sweeping eagerly over the living room. The woman smiled faintly, running her fingers across the mantel where Marcus's photo still stood. The man was already talking about renovations, pointing at the walls and muttering about knocking this one out. And there was Damien, trailing behind them with the swagger of a man who thought he was in control. The property has tons of potential, he said confidently. It's been in the family for years, but it's time to move forward. You're getting a great deal. Hearing him speak with such finality like I was already erased. Like the years I'd fought for this house meant nothing set my teeth on edge. I stepped out from the kitchen, my hands steady even though my heart hammered in my chest. Funny, Damien, I said, my voice slicing through the air. You forgot to mention one thing. You don't own this house. The couple froze mid-step. The woman pulled her hand back from the mantel as though it had burned her. Damien turned sharply, his expression flickering between shock and fury. Mom, he hissed through clenched teeth. Not now. Oh. I think now is the perfect time, I replied, pulling the deed from my bag. I held it high, letting the official seal glint under the overhead light. My name is Camelia Duarte. This is my house, and no one, not even my son, has the right to sell it without me. The buyers exchanged stunned looks. The man cleared his throat awkwardly. I think there's been some confusion. No confusion, I said calmly. You were lied to. He led you here under false pretenses. The woman's eyes hardened as she looked at Damien. You told us you were handling this sale with your mother's consent. Damien's mask cracked. She doesn't understand. She's attached, you know? She wasn't going to agree, but I knew it was the right thing. I was trying to make it easier for everyone. The man's face flushed with anger. Easier? You wasted our time. Do you have any idea what kind of legal mess this could cause if we'd gone further? I was going to handle it, Damien snapped, his voice rising. You don't understand, but they weren't listening anymore. The couple turned on their heels, muttering apologies to me as they hurried out the door. A moment later, the slam of their car doors and the screech of tires faded into the distance. Silence filled the room. Damien stood rigid, his face pale, his fists clenched at his sides. His eyes burned into me, full of fury and humiliation. You didn't have to do that in front of them, he spat. You embarrassed me. I raised my chin. No, Damien, you embarrassed yourself. You lied, you forged my name, you brought strangers into this house as if I didn't exist. All I did was show the truth. His nostrils flared. You're making a huge mistake. That was our chance. We could have gotten real money, Mom. We could have moved on from this dump. The words stung like a slap. A dump. The house I'd nearly killed myself to save, the house filled with Marcus's memory, reduced to a dump in his eyes. This house is not a dump, I said firmly. It's a home, my home. And you have no right to treat it like a pawn in your little game. He laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and ugly. It's just walls. And you'd rather keep clinging to the past than give us both a future. My voice stayed calm, though my chest ached. You keep saying us, Damien. But this isn't about us. It's about you, your greed, your entitlement. Your willingness to betray your own mother for money. His face twisted, and for the first time he looked less like the son I knew and more like a stranger standing in my living room. You'll regret this, he said through gritted teeth. I stepped closer, my eyes locked on his. No, Damien, you will. The words landed like a stone in the silence between us. For a long moment, neither of us moved. His breathing was sharp, uneven. Mine was steady. Finally, he turned on his heel, storming up the stairs and slamming his door. I stood there in the quiet house, the deed still clutched in my hand. My legs trembled, but my heart felt stronger than it had in years. He thought he could erase me, but I had just proven to him and to anyone watching that I wasn't powerless. And yet, I knew this wasn't over. Humiliation only made Damien more dangerous. But I wasn't finished with him yet. His mask of confidence cracked instantly. The buyer's car had barely turned the corner when Damien came storming down the stairs, his footsteps heavy, his face twisted with rage. The smirk he always wore, the one that made him look untouchable, was gone. In its place was something raw and ugly. Panic. "How could you do that to me?" he shouted, his voice echoing through the living room. "In front of them? You ruined everything!" I stood by the mantel, the deed still in my hand. My voice calm. "I didn't ruin anything, Damien. I saved it. This house. My name. Everything your lies were putting at risk." His fists tightened. "You embarrassed me. Do you know how hard I worked to set that up?" I couldn't stop the bitter laugh that escaped me. "Worked? Damien, you didn't work. You lied. You forged my signature. You tried to sell something that was never yours. That's not work. That's theft." The word hung heavy between us. Theft. His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he dropped his gaze to the floor, his chest rising and falling quickly. "You don't get it," he muttered. "I was doing it for us, for both of us. We could have been set for life." "For us?" My voice sharpened. "You never once asked me what I wanted. You never once thought about me. This was never about us, it was about you and your greed." His head snapped up, his eyes flashing. "I'm tired of living in your shadow, Mom. Tired of this stupid house holding me down. I'm not a kid anymore. I deserve more than this." I stared at him, my heart aching. "And you thought the way to get more was to steal from me? To erase everything your father and I built?" He flinched at the mention of Marcus, but the hardness in his eyes returned quickly. "Dad's gone. He wouldn't want you wasting your life clinging to this place." I felt my nails dig into the deed I held, my chest burning. "Don't you dare speak for your father. He loved this house. He trusted me to keep it safe for both of us, and I've done that, alone, for years, while you've done nothing but tear it down." He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. I pulled another envelope from my bag and tossed it onto the coffee table. The papers spilled out photos of the forged documents, printed emails, and the recordings I had kept. Damien froze. His eyes darted to the evidence, then back to me. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low. "Proof," I said evenly. "Proof that you lied, that you forged my name, that you tried to commit fraud. If I wanted to, Damien, I could take this to the police right now." His face drained of color. He stared at the papers like they were snakes ready to strike. "You wouldn't," he whispered. I held his gaze. "Try me." For the first time in this entire ordeal, Damien looked small. His bravado slipped, his shoulders hunched, his lips parted, but no words came. I saw the fear in his eyes, the realization that he wasn't untouchable after all. "You think you're clever," I said quietly. "You thought I wouldn't notice. You thought I'd stay quiet, like I always have. But you forgot something, Damien. I've been fighting to protect this house long before you were old enough to understand what sacrifice even meant. And I'm not about to lose it to my own son." His mouth opened and closed, struggling for words. Finally, he managed. I didn't mean to..." "Didn't mean to what?" I snapped. Didn't mean to hurt me, didn't mean to steal from me, or didn't mean to get caught. The silence stretched, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. I stepped closer, my voice steady, sharp. You need to understand something. I hold all the cards now. I have the deed. I have the law. I have proof of what you tried to do. If you think for 1 second I'll let you take another step towards selling this house, you're wrong. His breathing quickened, his chest heaving. The arrogance that had carried him all these months was gone, replaced by the heavy weight of fear and humiliation. Mom, please, he said finally, his voice breaking. You can't do this, I'm your son. I felt the words like knives. My son. Yes, he was my son, but he had chosen betrayal over loyalty, greed over family. I swallowed hard, forcing myself not to waver. Being my son doesn't give you the right to destroy me. For the first time, Damien had no comeback. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open, but no words came out. His eyes darted back to the pile of evidence on the table, and I saw it hit him. He was cornered. The room was thick with silence, broken only by the sound of his shaky breathing. And I knew then that the balance of power had shifted. For years, he had treated me like someone to be dismissed, someone too weak to stand in his way. But tonight, he saw me for what I was, the woman who held his future in her hands. The look on his face told me he finally understood I had the upper hand. For once, he was speechless. Damien sat frozen on the couch, staring at the pile of evidence spread across the coffee table. His hands twitched like he wanted to gather the papers and rip them apart, but he didn't dare. The weight of my gaze held him in place. I stood tall, clutching the deed against my chest, my voice steady. You've put me through enough, Damien. This ends now. He finally looked up, his eyes flashing. What do you mean it ends now? It means you don't get to live here and scheme against me, I said firmly. This is my house, my home. And if you can't respect that, then you can't stay here. His jaw dropped. You're kicking me out? I nodded slowly. If you keep betraying me, yes. You've already crossed every line a son should never cross. Forging my name, lying to buyers, trying to sell the very roof over our heads, there's no coming back from that without consequences. He shot up from the couch, his face red. You wouldn't, you can't, I'm your son. The words stabbed at me, but I held my ground. Being my son doesn't give you the right to steal from me. He began pacing, running his hands through his hair. You don't get it. I was doing this for both of us. You're stuck here, clinging to a house that's falling apart. I was trying to give us a future. No, Damien, I interrupted sharply. You were trying to give yourself a payday, don't dress it up as some noble act. If you wanted to help, you could have worked, you could have built something of your own. Instead, you tried to tear down what I've spent my life protecting. His fists clenched, his voice rising. You're making a mistake. You need me. What are you going to do without me? I almost laughed. What I've always done, survive, protect what matters. I've been doing it since the day your father died. You think I need you to save me? No, Damien. I needed you to stand beside me, and instead, you turned against me. He flinched at that, his eyes darting away. But the arrogance wasn't gone yet, it still clung to him like armor. You'll regret this, he muttered. I'll find another way. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so it cut sharper. Try it. I have everything I need to stop you. Deed, the law, proof of every forgery. You won't win, Damien. Not this time. The smirk he had worn for months faltered, slipping away completely. His lips parted, but no words came out. For once, my son, the boy who always thought he was the smartest person in the room, was silent. I set the deed down carefully, my eyes never leaving his. Here are the rules. If you stay in this house, you respect it. You respect me. You will not bring buyers here. You will not forge my name again. You will not treat me like an obstacle in my own home. Break these rules, Damien, and you're out. He stared at me, stunned. You'd really throw your own son out into the street? I swallowed hard, my throat aching. I don't want to. But I will if I have to. Because I'd rather lose a son who doesn't respect me than lose the home your father and I built together. His face contorted shock, anger, fear, all flashing across it. You're bluffing, he said weakly. I leaned closer, my eyes locked on his. Am I? The silence that followed was heavier than anything we'd shared before. I could see the wheels turning in his head, the cracks in his arrogance widening as reality pressed in on him. He wasn't the one in control anymore. I was. Finally, he sank back onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. You don't understand, he muttered, his voice muffled. I can't live like this. I wanted more. I stood over him, my voice softer but unyielding. Then you should have worked for more, not stolen it, not from me. Not from the father who left us this legacy. His shoulders shook slightly, though whether from anger or shame, I couldn't tell. I let the silence stretch before I turned toward the doorway. Think carefully, Damien. You've run out of chances. The next time you cross me, you'll find your bags on the porch. I walked upstairs, my steps slow but steady. For years, I had let Damien's arrogance drown me, convinced that keeping the peace meant keeping my mouth shut. But tonight, I had drawn the line. He could scream, he could beg, he could threaten, but the truth was undeniable. The house was mine. The choice was his. The smirk fell from his face as he realized I wasn't bluffing. He begged then, but it was too late. The morning after our confrontation, I came downstairs expecting silence, maybe even hostility. Instead, I found Damien sitting at the kitchen table, his head bowed, his hands clasped as if he were praying. The sight nearly undid me until he looked up. His eyes weren't repentant. They were calculating. Mom, he said, his voice low, almost soft. I'm sorry. The words I had longed to hear for weeks spilled out of him now, but they landed wrong. Forced. Practiced. His eyes flicked to me in a way too quickly. Like a child checking to see if his performance was convincing. I poured myself coffee and sat across from him. Watching. Waiting. He leaned forward, his tone growing desperate. I know I messed up. I shouldn't have forged your name. I shouldn't have gone behind your back. But you have to understand, I was scared. I thought we'd lose everything if we didn't act fast. I was just trying to protect us. I took a slow sip, letting the silence stretch before answering. Protect us? By selling the one thing I spent my life protecting? By betraying me? He winced, but recovered quickly. I made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. But I'm still your son. Doesn't that mean anything? The guilt play. I recognized it instantly. For years, Damien had leaned on that phrase, I'm your son, as if it were a shield strong enough to excuse anything. Late nights, bad grades, broken promises. But this wasn't a forgotten chore or a missed curfew. This was betrayal. It means everything, I said quietly. That's why this hurts more than anything else in my life. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of shame cross his face. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by a pleading look. Just give me another chance, he said, his voice cracking. I can do better. I'll find a job, I'll help with bills, whatever you want. Just don't throw me out. Please, Mom. I don't have anywhere else to go. I set my coffee down carefully, my hands steady though my heart ached. Damien, you didn't just make a mistake, you planned it. You forged signatures, brought buyers into this house, lied to my face. That wasn't one slip. That was a choice. Over and over again. His eyes brimmed with tears now, whether genuine or forced, I couldn't tell. I was stupid, I wasn't thinking. But I'll change, I promise. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But the evidence spread across my memory like scars, every smirk, every lie, every shrug when I asked questions. He hadn't been thoughtless. He had been deliberate. You've broken my trust, I said firmly. And trust isn't rebuilt with promises, it's rebuilt with actions. And right now, your actions are telling me you're only sorry because you got caught. His tears spilled over, his hands reaching across the table as if to grab mine. Don't do this, Mom. Don't give up on me. I'm your son. The ache in my chest grew sharper, but I pulled my hands back into my lap. I will always love you. That will never change. But love doesn't mean I let you destroy me. The words seemed to stun him. He blinked rapidly, as if he hadn't expected me to hold firm. For a moment, he looked like a boy again, confused, lost, grasping for an anchor. But then his jaw tightened. His eyes darkened. The mask slipped, and the anger returned. You're choosing a house over me, he spat. No, I said softly. I'm choosing myself. I'm choosing the years of sacrifice, the nights I went hungry, the promises I made to your father. I'm choosing not to let my own son treat me like an obstacle. His mouth opened, then closed. He shook his head, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. You'll regret this, he muttered. You think you're strong, but you're not. You need me. I stood slowly, straightening my shoulders. I needed you to be my son. But instead, you became my enemy. The words rang out, final and heavy. Damien froze, his face pale. For once, he had no reply. He simply stared at me, his lips parted, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. I walked to the doorway, pausing just long enough to add, You have a choice, Damien. Respect me in this house or start packing. I won't ask again. I left him there, sitting in the kitchen with his crocodile tears and his hollow promises. My hands shook as I climbed the stairs, but my resolve didn't falter. Because I knew the truth. My love for him was real, but my limits were absolute. The day came when I put his bags by the door. It wasn't an impulsive decision. It wasn't anger boiling over. It was deliberate, steady, necessary. After weeks of watching Damien twist between arrogance and fake apologies, I realized he wasn't going to change. His words were empty, his promises hollow. And every day he stayed under my roof. The house felt less like home and more like a battlefield. So I acted. On a gray Saturday morning, while Damien was out with friends, I went into his room. It was a mess: clothes on the floor, empty cans on the dresser, half-packed boxes he'd been too lazy to finish. The sight made my stomach clench. This was what he thought of the house, a dumping ground. One by one, I pulled his things together. I folded what could be folded, boxed what needed boxing, and stacked the rest by the front door. I wasn't cruel. I didn't throw his belongings in the trash. But I was firm. This house would no longer shelter betrayal. By the time I was finished, the entryway was lined with suitcases and boxes. The air felt lighter, as though the walls themselves had sighed in relief. When Damien came home that afternoon, he stopped dead in the doorway. His eyes darted from the bags to me, standing calmly by the stairs. What is this?" he demanded. I met his gaze without flinching. Your things. You said you wanted freedom, Damien. Well, now you have it. You can't live here anymore. His face twisted, shock giving way to fury. You're kicking me out? You're serious? I nodded. Dead serious. I warned you. You broke my trust. This is the consequence. He laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and cruel. You're unbelievable. You'd rather keep this stupid house than your own son. My throat tightened, but my voice stayed steady. I'd rather keep my dignity than be destroyed by the person I love most. I will always be your mother, but I will not be your victim. His eyes flashed, his fists clenched. Where am I supposed to go? That's for you to figure out, I said calmly. You're grown. You wanted independence. Well, here at Island. He paced the living room like a caged animal, his voice rising with each word. This isn't fair. You owe me, Mom. After everything, I'm your son. I felt the ache in my chest, but I didn't waver. I owe you nothing but love, Damien. And love doesn't mean letting you tear me apart. Neighbors passing on the sidewalk glanced curiously at the scene through the open door. I saw Mrs. Hale from across the street pause with her dog, her eyes widening at the sight of Damien's belongings piled on the porch. She looked at me, then at him, and shook her head slightly before moving on. Damien noticed too. His face reddened, humiliation mixing with his anger. "You're making me look like a fool in front of everyone." "No," I said softly. "You did that yourself." For a long moment, he stood there, chest heaving, eyes wild. I braced myself, half expecting him to explode, but instead, his shoulders sagged. He grabbed a suitcase roughly, dragging it across the porch. The sound of the wheels scraping the wood echoed louder than any argument we'd ever had. One by one, he hauled his things out, muttering under his breath. I didn't catch every word, but I heard enough: selfish, pathetic, heartless. I let him speak, let him lash out, because the truth was, his words no longer held power over me. When the last box was in his car, he slammed the trunk shut and turned to face me one final time. His eyes burned with resentment. "Don't expect me to come back. You'll die alone in that house, and when you do, don't think anyone will remember you kindly." The venom stung, but I refused to let it show. I lifted my chin, meeting his gaze with steady calm. Better alone with peace than surrounded by betrayal. He stared at me for a moment longer, then climbed into his car. The engine roared, the tires squealed, and just like that, he was gone. The silence that followed was profound. No more slammed doors, no more whispered phone calls, no more tension thick in the air. Just stillness. I closed the front door slowly, my hand lingering on the knob. The house creaked gently around me, as if exhaling after years of strain. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe. Because the truth was, I wasn't the one losing a home, he was. I watched as my son carried box after box to his car. Each trip Damien made from the porch to the driveway felt like a slow unspooling of years. The backpack he slung over his shoulder reminded me of his first day of school, when Marcus and I walked him to class. The box of trophies, most of them participation awards, brought back memories of little league games where I cheered the loudest, even when he struck out. The pile of worn hoodies looked like the ones I used to fold fresh from the laundry, pressing my face into the fabric to catch a whiff of my boy's shampoo. Now, all of it was reduced to cargo, stuffed into a trunk that rattled when slammed shut. Neighbors lingered longer than usual that afternoon. Curtains twitched. Mrs. Hale's dog barked at the commotion. Mr. Larson paused with his lawnmower, wiping sweat from his brow as he shook his head. Their whispers pricked at the edges of my ears. But I stood straight, my hands folded, my chin high. Let them talk. Let them speculate. The truth was mine to carry, and I carried it without shame. Damien avoided my eyes with every trip. His jaw was clenched, his lips pressed thin, and I could see the storm brewing behind his silence. Still, he didn't dare speak until the last box thudded into the trunk. He turned then, his glare sharp enough to cut glass. "I hope you're happy," he spat. "You've ruined everything. You'll regret this when you're old and alone." The words pierced, but they didn't destroy. I met his glare calmly. "I'll regret nothing, Damien. I fought for this house. I fought for you, but I won't fight against you anymore." His mouth twisted. "You chose the house over me." "No," I said softly. "I chose self-respect. I chose to honor the sacrifices your father and I made. I chose not to let my son turn me into a doormat." For a moment, his expression wavered, but the anger returned quickly, blotting out whatever hesitation flickered there. He shook his head, muttered something I didn't catch, and climbed into his car. The engine coughed to life, tires squealed against the pavement, and then he was gone. Just like that. I stood on the porch, the echo of the moment stretching long into the quiet street. The house loomed behind me, steady and solid, its walls weathered but unbroken. For the first time in years, I felt the same. Weathered, but unbroken. When I stepped back inside, the silence was startling. No footsteps upstairs. No slammed doors. No tension humming in the air like a wire about to snap. Just peace. I walked slowly through each room, letting my hand brush across the surfaces. The living room, where Marcus and I danced late at night when Damien was a baby. The hallway, where Damien's childish drawings still faintly marked the wall despite all my scrubbing. The kitchen, where Marcus kissed my cheek every morning before work. It was all still here. Still mine. And now, safe again. I sank onto the couch, exhaustion pressing down on me. Tears welled in my eyes. Not just for Damien's betrayal, but for the boy I had lost somewhere along the way. My son, the little boy who once swore he'd build me a castle when he grew up, was gone. Replaced by a man I didn't recognize. It hurt. God, it hurt. But beneath the grief was something else. Relief. I no longer had to look over my shoulder, wondering when the next lie would surface. I no longer had to sift through envelopes in dread, afraid of what he'd forged this time. I no longer had to defend my home against the very person I'd built it for. The house was mine again. Fully, truly mine. That evening, as the sun dipped low, the oak tree in the backyard cast long shadows through the window. I stepped outside, standing under its branches. The air was crisp, the world quiet. I pressed a hand to the rough bark, remembering Marcus's laugh as he dug the soil, Damien's small hands patting dirt over the roots. "We did it," I whispered. "We kept it." A breeze rustled the leaves, and for a moment, I swore I felt Marcus there beside me. When I went back inside, the house greeted me with silence but not emptiness. It was filled with memories, with strength, with survival. And though Damien was gone, though my heart ached with the loss of what he had become, I knew I had done the right thing. And for the first time in years, the house felt safe again. That night, I sat in the quiet house and let myself breathe. The stillness was unlike anything I had felt in years. No muffled phone calls seeping under closed doors, no tension, vibrating through the walls like static. No footsteps pounding angrily across the floorboards. Just silence. But this silence wasn't heavy or suffocating, it was peaceful. Healing. I curled up on the couch with a cup of tea, the mug warm between my hands. For the first time in months, I wasn't bracing for the sound of Damien's voice, sharp and dismissive, cutting into me like a blade. I wasn't waiting for the next envelope with forged signatures or the next stranger at my door pretending they had business with my house. I was just still. My eyes drifted across the room, landing on the mantel. Marcus's photo caught the soft glow of the lamp, his smile frozen in time. I imagined what he might say if he were here now. He had always been stronger than me, steady in ways I struggled to be. But I think even with the ache of what happened, he would have been proud. Proud that I finally stood my ground. Proud that I refused to let betrayal steal the home we built together. Proud that I chose myself. I let the tears fall then, silent and steady. They weren't the desperate sobs of someone broken, they were the release of someone finally free. The house creaked around me, the familiar sounds like a lullaby. It wasn't empty, it was full of memories, full of echoes of laughter, full of everything I had fought to keep alive. The next morning, I walked room to room, slowly, deliberately. I touched the walls, the door frames, the windowsills. I lingered in Damien's old room, now bare except for the faded blue paint on the walls and the faint crayon marks he once made when he thought I wasn't looking. My heart ached, but I smiled. Because those marks were mine to keep now, untouched, unsold, safe. Neighbors asked questions in the following days, their voices cautious but curious. "Is Damien all right? What happened?" "We saw him leave in such a hurry," I simply answered. He needed to move on. And it was true, he had chosen a path that couldn't coexist with mine. He wanted quick money, easy shortcuts, a future built on lies. But I wanted peace, respect, and dignity. We had reached a fork in the road, and I had finally chosen myself over his betrayal. Some whispered judgment behind closed doors, others nodded in quiet approval. It didn't matter. For once, I wasn't living to please or to prove. I was living for me. Each night, I sat in the dining room at the oak table, the same one where I had once been too exhausted to eat after long shifts. The same one where Damien had done homework while Marcus read the paper. I sat there now with my tea. Sometimes with a book. Sometimes with nothing but the sound of the wind in the oak tree outside. And every night, I pulled out a chair. My chair. It struck me, sitting there, how symbolic it all was. Damien had treated me like a piece of furniture to be moved aside, an obstacle in the way of his plans. He had stripped me of my voice, my respect, my place in my own home. But in the end, he was the one who left. Not me. The house was mine. The memories were mine. The strength I had fought to find was mine. I knew the pain of his absence would linger. He was still my son. And some part of me would always hope he found his way back not to my house, but to himself. But until then, I wouldn't let his choices define me. I had survived debt, grief, loneliness, and now I had survived betrayal. That night, as I turned off the lights and climbed the stairs to bed, I paused at the doorway. The house hummed with quiet, strong and steady around me. I whispered into the stillness, more to myself than anyone else. You tried to take this house from me, Damien. But you're the one who lost it. I closed the door gently behind me, my heart lighter than it had been in years. My son tried to sell my house behind my back, but in the end, he was the one packing.